Hello, everybody. How are you all? I hope that you're all having a wonderful day. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Thanks so much for joining us today for our second form workshop on the How to Be Open series. This one is going to be targeting librarians. Just letting all of the participants just kind of flow in. So do bear with us for just a moment while we give everyone a chance to settle in. My name is Nahil. I'm the Community Engagement Manager for the forum. And one of my jobs is to host and support all of our wonderful community development activities that we host throughout the year. Just bear with again. Sorry, we're just waiting for a few more people to enter the room. We'll be starting probably just in another minute or so. And while we wait, please do feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who you are, where you're coming from. It's always nice to get to know our community in as much detail as we can. I am seeing some familiar names in the list of participants. Hello to all of you and to all of our new faces. Hi as well. So just a few more minutes and we'll get started. Okay, I think we can get started, and if anyone's joining later, they can always just hop in. So welcome again to everyone who is joining us for the How to Be Open workshop for librarians, or dedicated to librarians. We're so excited to have you all on board for our second workshop. We're definitely still trial and erroring the workshop kind of concept. So we definitely will love some feedback from you guys at the end of the event. But for now, let's get started. So just a few housekeeping points right before we crack on with the actual event. This is a workshop, which is why we've set it up in a meeting format, which means that you do technically have access to your camera and microphone. However, we will ask that everybody please keep their microphones and cameras off throughout the duration of the event while we have our invited speaker presenting, just out of respect for him and so that he doesn't get any distractions as well. There will be a discussion point of the event where people will then be invited to turn on their microphones and their cameras. And if you have any questions or you have anything you want to share, you'll be able to raise your hand. That's for the discussion part. However, throughout the presentation, if you have any issues, or if you believe that either I or our speaker, are talking too fast, please just use the raise hand feature and that will kind of signal us to slow down. Because it's a meeting, there is no Q&A box. However, if you have any questions throughout the event, or you want to share your opinions or your thoughts on a certain subject, please go ahead and do that in the chat. Also, if you're experiencing any technical issues, if you're having a hard time hearing us, or for whatever reason, anything else glitching, also do let us know on the chat, and our support, Joy, who's with us in the back, she'll be able to support you through that hopefully as well. The last thing is unfortunately not applicable today. We don't have any polls or breakout rooms for this particular workshop, so we're just going to skip right past that. Sorry, these are standard slides. So moving on, I'm sure, like I said, we've seen a lot of familiar names piling in, but for anyone who might be new to Forum, who doesn't know exactly what we're all about yet, this is just a brief introduction. We're a nonprofit membership organization supporting the advancement of open science policies and practices in research communities throughout the Arab region. We do that through 4 main pillars, which is supporting the development and advancement of the ecosystems that already exist in the Arab world, or the development of new ones. We also create accessible and localized resources related to how to implement open science policies across different stakeholder groups and just different types of organizations. We also encourage collaboration through our community, through activities like this one, through our community development activities. And we are working to hopefully champion the development of right to left functionality in key open source and open science solutions. And some of our activities are the main pillars of kind of what we do. So we can move on to it. Yeah. Here we go. So Forum has three main activities or three main streams. We have the resources, as I've mentioned, which are guidance resources. We're actually going to also be launching, hopefully, don't hold me to it, but hopefully we'll be launching our journal, Al Wusul, around the time of the annual forum, which is the second kind of stream. It's a conference that we host every October. It's an annual event that takes place throughout the Arab world. Last year we had it in UAE. The year before that was in Cairo. And this year we are lucky enough to be hosting it in Doha in partnership with the Qatar National Library. And then the last stream is our community development activities. So those include workshops like today's, webinars that we've hosted in the past, and working groups that come kind of on a rolling basis. So that's kind of a summary of who we are. And I'm sure you're all eager to get started on the actual learning part of the event. So I will now hand over to our speaker, Dr. Al-Walid Al-Khaja, who is the head of open access and copyright at the Qatar National Library. So he's actually our host partner for the upcoming annual forum. He is also on the advisory board for forum and is a very passionate advocate for open access and open science across the region as a whole, but also specifically within Qatar. So I invite you to turn on your microphone and camera. Hello, Dr. Al-Walid, please. Take it away.
All right, let me just share my screen. All right, can you see the screen? So
yes,
hi everyone.
we can see
hi everyone. My name is Al-Walid, and it's my privilege to be here today to talk to you about how to be more open as libraries. So, and before that, I do hope that I get to see many of you at the conference in October, which we'll be hosting together with Forum. Before we start, I just want to give an idea about Qatar National Library. This is really our home. And Qatar National Library opened in 2018, and it has different functions. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. There are some words that I'll be talking about more and more regularly throughout this session today: functions, values, and principles. But to give you an idea of what we do, because I'll be using many examples from Qatar National Library. We have a main library, which is a public library, and we have a lot of references, reference books, etc., books for the public. We have a heritage library where we capture and preserve and archive the region's heritage, Qatar and the region. We have a children's library, which can be very noisy at sometimes, but it's one of the nicest places in the library. And it has also like a lecture theater inside, so it's very cool. We also do many special events. So this is a picture of the special events area, which will have the opening session for the Forum conference. But here what we see is one of our free events. I mean, all of our events are free. This is an event that we host once a month with the Qatar Philharmonic Orchestra. We also do a lot of conferences, and this is the Gulf Architecture Conference a couple of years ago. And we also have different exhibitions. Now, the mission of Qatar National Library is to preserve the nation and region's heritage and enable the people of Qatar to positively influence society by creating an exceptional environment for learning and discovery. And we, as I mentioned, have different functions. So in name and function, we are the National Library here in Qatar, but we're also a research library. And you'll see that kind of, I'll focus on that a bit because I'll be talking about how many of the services that we do when it comes to open access for researchers. We're also a public library, and we also have an initiative called Qatar Reads, where we try to encourage children and the youth in Qatar to read more. And that's actually a very nice service. You get books delivered to your house once a month and languages and levels of your choosing. Now, at QNL, we also have different library values. And as I mentioned, I'll be focusing on the word value over and over again. Our library values, we have openness and transparency, education and lifelong learning, open access. It's really great. Equity, diversity, inclusion, accessibility, respect, and fairness, growth and innovation, stewardship, and intellectual freedom. And today, I mean, I kind of, to be honest, I struggled on how to organize today's slides because what we promised is a lot of content, but I'll try to go over each one, but realistically, each part will need its own webinar or its own session. But hopefully today, I'll give you kind of a flavor of what libraries can do, and not specifically what we're doing and not focusing on what we're doing, but focus like really what libraries in general can do. How can libraries implement open access policies? How can libraries set up an open access fund? How they can do read and publish agreements, how they can develop institutional repositories, and how they can make digitized content accessible. Now, I won't go through these in the same order, and you'll see, and I'll also define what I mean by each term. Before we start, I want to say that libraries and openness, and so whether it's open access, open science, come hand in hand. When it comes to the open movement, libraries or librarians are the best friends of the movement. Librarians understand this, they understand the value behind it, they understand how it can benefit society and how it can benefit education and etc. More than, I would say, more than any other stakeholder when it comes to the open movement. And what I would like you to come out of the webinar today is maybe just a question, really. I want you to ask yourself, what can you do at your own library? So after looking at what I'll be presenting about different ideas and what libraries can do, the idea is that for you to go back to your library and see, okay, what are you doing right now? How can you do more? Or if you haven't started, like, how can you start? And some like words of caution, I guess, going into this journey together there, is that not all libraries are the same. And different libraries, of course, have different functions, different priorities, different goals. And as you know, like, talking with any librarian, having the human capital, the human resources, enough staff is always a struggle. It's always a limitation. It's a factor. But, you know, great things come from small teams. We also work within the library community. We're a library community, and the libraries are very collaborative. Every librarian or have this kind of sense of wanting to help. And for us, when even doing all this kind of, let's say, trying to be more open, we reach out to different libraries and from all over the world, and they were very collaborative. They're happy to share their experiences. So it's you're not alone. Like, libraries are always working together. And you know, what works for one library may not work for your library. So I'll be using examples from QNL, but because that's what I know best, and that's what I work with on a daily basis. But this doesn't mean that what we do in QNL is the right option for you. But the idea of today is just to give you kind of a sense of what we're doing. And again, and I know, like, my colleague Milan is in the call here today, and he will say, he will attest that we're not doing enough. And I believe that. We're doing something that's good, but we can do more. And just to also say that there are many examples from our region, from around the world, but we will, that we can discuss, but I mean, maybe we don't have time today. So to get kind of the ball rolling and to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about today, I want to talk about some definitions. Switching off my phone. I want to talk about some definitions, because when we talk about open access or open science, it can get a bit confusing. Open, of course, is the common word, and I don't think really it changes, or at least from my perspective. But when you talk about open, even when you talk with librarians, with publishers, they may have different ideas what open means or to what extent they want to be open. For us, or at least myself, I would say, and this is a slide I have to admit I've been using, I believe, for the last 12 years. So when it comes to open, I see, or we see, that content should be free to use. That's the general thing. It's like there's no accessibility or no access issue. You can use the content, whatever content we're talking about, can be modified to an extent. But really the importance of it is that it can be shared with anyone for any purpose. And in the heart of open access, sorry, I keep saying open access, but in open openness or open scholarship of science, Creative Commons is basically the driver behind the open movement. Now, Creative Commons is a nonprofit organization, and they have created these different licenses that basically communicate to whoever is accessing the content or using content that this content can be free to use, accessible, and also explains the different levels of openness. I'm not going to go through every single one, but just many of you are already aware of this, there are different levels of open licenses, going from the very kind of liberal license, the Creative Commons Attribution or the CC BY, which allows anybody to copy and publish the work, even for commercial use, modify it, change the license, as long as they give attribution, to the least kind of liberal or the most restrictive, which is the CC BY and CND, which allows people to copy and publish the work, but not allow it for any commercial use or modification or making derivatives. And there's also content that is in the public domain. Now, as I said, we're talking about so many different things, so I don't want to confuse and bring in different elements. But when we talk about licensing and Creative Commons, copyright is an essential element. And copyright basically is a law and basically that protects the creative works. And this protection usually lasts for a specific period, anywhere lasting from 50 years to 70 years, depending on the country. But when this period is over, the work becomes what we call is the public domain. There are no restrictions. So with Creative Commons, this is what we believe is the kind of the driver at the heart of openness. Now, just to go over some definitions, I'm sharing with you some resources that would be beneficial, I think, in the long term. So this is an open access vocabulary developed by IFLA earlier this year. And there's a link, and it's open access as well. And also there's the form. What we did together with form is have an open science Arabic English glossary, which is also available online. And that's something we published last year. So just to go over some definitions, so we have a common understanding or kind of a basis to where we have this discussion, talk about different examples. By open access, what we mean is, again, it's literature that is freely available on the public internet, permitting any users to read, download, copy, distribute, print, search, or link to the full text of these articles, scroll them, index them, etc., etc. So that's what we really mean by open access, that there shouldn't be any technical, financial, legal barriers to it. And again, when we talk about open access, what happens is that with publishers, they would assign one of the Creative Commons licenses to a work and makes it open access. They could use the most liberal one, the CC BY, or they can use any of their more restrictive licenses. But again, in the end, it's open access. When it comes to open science or open scholarship, open science combines various movements and practices aiming to make scientific knowledge more openly available. So it's basically looking at the whole cycle of the scientific process and trying to make every element, and not only the output of the publication, but every single kind of element in the workflow involved to be more open, more transparent. Open source, which we'll come to briefly later on when we talk about repositories, is software which the source code is published and made available to the public, enabling anybody to copy, modify, and distribute. And this is really important when it comes to open repositories. Many choose to use repositories that are based on open source. Open data, again, is basically what we talked about, but specifically kind of open licensing, but applied to data. And I won't go through the definitions. The resources are available online that you can check. open infrastructure, and this is a definition from the Global Sustainability Coalition for Open Science Services, or SCOSS. Open infrastructure are the structures and facilities in the scholarly communication world, I guess the resources, the services, including software that we depend on to make scientific and scholarly community to collect, store, organize, access, share, and access research. So basically, these are the services that we use to enable kind of open science, to enable open access. And they could range from anywhere from repositories to different services that enable open science. And then comes to the last one, the open repository basically is a digital platform that you can store, record, and organize different scholarly publications in one place. But also a really important part of the repository is preservation. The one thing we want to do is not only store it, but make sure it's available on the long term. Definition, I'm over it. That's the 8 definitions. But as you can see, the topic is really huge. It's like we're looking at this kind of mountain. And if we ask the questions how libraries can be more open, we really need to look at all these aspects. And what we'll be doing today is just focusing, we're going to have a snapshot of different aspects of being open. So not everything. So there's a lot to discover. It's like basically, when you're looking for directions, Google Maps might tell you exactly where to go. But when it comes to openness and open access, it's a journey. And I like to refer to this poem by Nizar Qabbani. And my wife jokes is that she believes this is the only poetry I know. I don't think that's true, but I like it. So basically, Nizar Qabbani is a famous Arabic poet. And in his poem, one of his poems, he wrote: الحب ليس رواية شرقية بختامها يتزوج الأبطال لكنه الإبحار دون سفينة وشعورنا للوصول معها. Basic translation is that love is not an Eastern novel or story that ends with the marriage of the protagonist, but it's sailing without a boat and feeling that the reaching destination is impossible. And here what I did was cross out the word love and replace it with openness or إتاحة. And basically that's it really. It's like when reaching open access or open science or openness, it's a long journey. And we don't know basically how to get to the end. Maybe there is no end. It's a spectrum that doesn't maybe finish, but it's different steps that we build along the way. So what's really important for librarians and libraries to think is not only like that we have to be more open, but really to think about why. What's the value behind being more open? And the value not only for the librarians, but also for the community and the public, for the patrons that we serve. So it's very important to talk about values and principles. As I mentioned, the road to openness isn't maybe defined. Maybe there is no end to this. There is like an ever-going, perpetual way of making things better and more transparent and more open. So what really should drive us are the values and principles. Exactly why are we doing it? Why are we trying to be more open? This is not an all-in conclusive list. This is what I thought would be a set of values that can define why we do or why we want to be more open. So whenever we do, whatever activity we do, whether it's a repository or a fund or the policies, some of the things we'll discuss today, we need to ask ourselves the question, are we maximizing access? Are we making access to the content, to the research data, to whatever we're presenting more accessible? Are we maximizing it? Are we maximizing educational benefits? In the end, the open licenses are there to enable resharing, making derivatives. And for us, or I would say in the Arab world, really, the derivatives is really important. Many of the publications that are published worldwide are in non-Arabic. They're English, for example. So to be able to translate it into Arabic is really helpful. And one of the examples that we're doing is like with the Open Access Fund, we're seeing authors here in Qatar are publishing books in Arabic that were originally published in English. And I think that's really great. So are we maximizing the educational benefit? Are we maximizing reuse? Now, I mentioned like the translation example, but reuse could mean different things. It could also mean like commercial reuse. It could also, and I'll talk about how it could also not necessarily mean research in kind of research outputs in the classical sense, but it could also mean heritage material. Are we maximizing the reuse? Can we allow people to reuse it in whatever way they want? Are we following copyright law? And are we allowing authors to retain copyright? Now, I don't want to go into the fine details of retaining copyright, but one issue that we see is that even when it comes to open access or, I guess, classical publishing, publishers require the author to assign their copyright to them. And this is something that we don't want. We want to empower the researchers, we want to empower the authors and allow them to retain their copyright so that they could do whatever they want in the future with their own copyright. So I'll come back to the slide multiple times in the next minutes, half an hour. But just keep in mind that ask the question, why? Why are you doing a certain thing and not necessarily following a certain steps? As I said, what would work for one library might not work for yours. So you have to think about why, but this kind of checklist helps you along the way. Are you maximizing access? Are you maximizing education benefits, reuse, and allowing copyright authors to retain copyright? So the first example I want to talk about today is how libraries can be more open when making digitized content accessible. And I'll be talking about two aspects here: the cultural heritage, so basically archival material or content that could be out of copyright in the public domain, or contemporary collections, so works that are contemporary, new, and the libraries are collecting. And I'll give examples of both using QAnon. But to refer to a project that is run by the Creative Commons, which is called Open Culture, making your content, if you're a library that has a lot of archival material, maybe you're a national library, or you're an archive, maybe not, and then how can you make your content that you have in the library, if it's digitized, to be more open? You can put it, of course, on a platform or a repository, but the idea is that there are really key benefits to having this out there. Now, making heritage much easier to find, preserved, and safeguarded. Of course, easier to find, that's easy to understand, but preserved also is that if you allow, if you publish it with public domain kind of information or kind of the right statements, it allows others to make copies of it, and then basically the content is preserved in multiple copies. Another thing is that by making the open culture or the cultural heritage material more open, you would allow more research to be done. So basically, the more researchers will publish about your heritage, and you'll get more publications, and it kind of it has a huge impact on education. And there's also more dynamic culture creativity. Lots of the arts depend on what has already been kind of created. So when we're talking about culture heritage, of course, we can't ignore the arts, the creative works, and having it online will definitely push for more kind of creativity around the world. Now, this is one of the few examples where I link outside Kernel, but this is probably one of my favorite platforms. So the Rijksmuseum in the Netherlands, they have something called the Rijks Studio. And all these works that you can see on the screen are available online for free. Most of them are in the public domain. So the Rijksmuseum have published all of these in really high quality and ask people, do whatever you want. And even on the website, you can go and see examples of how you can make phone covers or tote bags of these. And I personally, on my personal time, use these images for arts. I'm interested in seeing how public domain works can be reused to creating new works. But this is a really good example, and I really invite you to go and check the Rijks Studio. But what Creative Commons also did is they have a list of all the different platforms online that have done a great job in making their content more visible, more open. And each item is there with really clear licenses. So When it comes, I'm going to circle back to QRL here. For QRL, now I mentioned we're a national library, so we also have a large archive of heritage content in the library. And our principles when it comes to this is that we do not want to assert copyright over copies that have entered the public domain. You'll see that some libraries around the world will say, yes, we've digitized the content, therefore it's ours, and we will make it, like we will put our license on it, and we will ask people to pay to use it. We don't follow that. We think that if an item is in the public domain, the original item, a digital copy of it does not create new copyright, and therefore the digital copy should also be in it. And in QNL, we work with different partners. So we're trying to repatriate content from different regions around the world that are related to Qatar and the region. And when we do these partnerships, we also don't ask for exclusive licenses or exclusive rights for digitized content. We believe that if we get content from elsewhere, it should be public and it should be freely available to them for us to use. More copies keeps things safe. Just to give an example of how we apply these principles, I'm going to use the Qatar Digital Library, which is a digital platform run by Qatar National Library, where we publish all the heritage materials that we have. Now, to make it more open, we make it bilingual, so it's both in English and Arabic. And this kind of bilingual interface is not only for the material, but also applies to the metadata. We try to to enrich the metadata with content that's basically descriptive, that's searchable and downloadable. We also try to make sure that the information about the source is obvious and open and transparent. And very importantly is that we have detailed copyright and reuse information. For example, in this case, we show that who's the author. In this case, it's the East India Company, and the usage terms is public domain. So once you click, it's a hyperlink, so you can click on it, understand what public domain means, and then you understand what you can do and what you can't do with the content. In this case, there aren't any restrictions. But we try to be as transparent as possible. We also encourage other platforms to reuse the content. And this is two examples of the Digital Library of the Middle East and Wikipedia, where we encourage others to use it. And that's something what we believe is essential for open culture. Another thing that we do are what we call contemporary collections. So here, Qatar hosted the World Cup 2 years ago. And we did this campaign where we asked the community to submit images of their experiences from the World Cup for those who attended the games or those who were attending the fan zones and who were in Qatar at the time. And all the images that we've collected are licensed to us under Creative Commons licenses by the photographers. We also did a Wiki Loves Monuments in Qatar 2021, where we asked photographers in Qatar to capture heritage locations in Qatar, and all the images are available in Wikimedia under the Creative Commons licenses. And we also did a staff photography competition. We basically, this is something, you can see that I love photography. So we did a photography competition for staff, and all the images are licensed to the library under the Creative Commons licenses. So which means that the library can use the images for anything that we want, as long as, of course, we give attribution to the staff member. So we did this twice, one where we tried to capture the architecture of the library, and the other one is where we try to get images inspired by the books in our public collection or the main collection. So again, when we look at this, to ask the questions, are we maximizing access? So we clearly ask for licenses that allow for reuse. And therefore we're trying to maximize education, reuse, and again, with application of the Creative Commons licenses, we don't, in the case of the contemporary collections, we don't take any copyright. We're not assigned any copyright, we don't claim it. It's the researcher or the authors or the photographers, and we just get a license to use. So this is, again, a driver behind why we do things. I'm going now to shift gears now to something that I work with on a daily basis, which is the Open Access Fund. So I'm ready to talk about the heritage and kind of content and making content available. I'm going to shift gears right now to talk about more kind of research-oriented aspects of being open. And we'll be talking about the fund, the read and publish agreements, and then also about the repository. So again, ask a question, why even have an open access fund? It's not, I don't think if you see other libraries doing it, that you should do it. You really have to assess, is there a need in your own library? We see it, there's a definite need for us, so we did it, but it could be different from yours. But in general, around the world, and especially in the region, researchers want their articles to be open access. They want people to read it. They want to have higher visibility for their content, and open access makes sense. Anybody around the world doesn't need a subscription to actually access the content. They can just read it for free. So it improves the impact of the article. Now, what we see here is that, or I think everywhere, is that if there's a lack of funding, the choice of publishing open access is dependent on the availability of funds. And in many regions, especially ours, there's a general lack of institutional support for open access. And there's a lack of sufficient funding to support from research grant agencies. So in Qatar, for example, like there is, of course, grants coming up, but they're not enough to cover the open access output. Or even in certain cases that what you'll see is that the grant has elapsed and the researchers have finished the research itself, but the publications come afterwards and the grant does not cover this. So ask yourself, why should you have an open access fund? And if you have any of those issues at your own library, then it may make sense to set up something. Now, what kind of fund look like? It could look whatever you want it to look like. It could have different, there's no right answer. In the end, it really depends on how much money your library can put towards open access. And of course, as I said, not every library is the same. Some libraries don't even have the budget for this. Others may have so much, so they could have more flexibility. So a fund, if you decide to have one, could look quite different, or could look differently depending on your capabilities, on your capacities. So one example is you can dedicate a budget to cover some articles from your researchers, and you can set the criteria. You can put anywhere from, let's say, $500 a year to $5,050. It's really up to you. You can also have some publishing agreements. So what you could do is say, well, we know that our faculty or our researchers publish a lot with this publisher, whatever, publisher Y or publisher X. So it would make sense then to, instead of doing every single article or paying every single article individually or covering its cost, you can have an agreement with that publisher. And these agreements usually, in most cases, have benefits to the library. The obvious benefit is that you have less admin work. So how these agreements work is that basically you would pay, it's like a prepaid telephone number or prepaid plan. You pay X amount of money to the publisher, let's say $5,000, $10,000, depending on your needs. And then whenever an article needs to be covered, they deduct that amount from that fund. And what usually happens is that the publishers would give you a discount ranging anywhere from 5% to 50%. So not only are you saving time and effort, but you're also saving money, which could be reused to support other articles, for example. You don't have to cover the full fee as well. You can do discounts. In fact, some publishers actually have some agreements where by just signing up with them, you don't actually have to pay them anything. You can get the 5%, 10% discount. So you can get discounts. You don't have to cover the whole thing. And of course, the more complex or the more advanced way of doing a fund is operating it using the read and publish agreements, which is basically transitioning your e-resources cost to open access. So I'll give an example of Qatar National Library again, and our open access program. So the objective of our program, the why for us, is basically one, to cover the open access publishing costs for Qatar-based researchers, because there's a lack of institutional funds. And the other is to create and contribute a permanent archive of Qatar-based research at CAN. This program was announced in Open Access Week 2015, I believe. And so it's almost now 9 years since we've been doing this. Now, what we our goal is not only to cover the fees, but also thinking, okay, we want the content to be added to the library. We want in 50 years' time that people can have access to it. And we want the people now to have access to it, because, if the obvious issue is that if a researcher in your library, like associated with the library, publishes an article that is behind the paywall, who has access to it? And the question that we always ask, if you publish an article, or if somebody publishes an article and nobody reads it, have they actually published it? I don't think so. So open access, openness to content is essential. And some criteria that we do with our fund is that they have to be associated or affiliated with a Qatar-based institution. They have to have used all other resources of funding. And very importantly is that the journal that they choose should be listed in the directory of open access journals. One issue that comes over and over all the time is about predatory publishing. How can libraries protect authors from predatory publishers? How can they make sure that their money doesn't go to predatory publishers? So our advice is to use the DOAJ. That's the whitelist. That's the go-to list that ensures the quality of the journals. And what we do it through our fund is, we operate it in two different ways. One is through different agreements. So we have agreements with publishers, but we also have this set of budget set aside where we do it as a credit card payment or purchase order. Majority, I would say 80% go through central, or 90% of all of our articles go through agreements, and the rest are through what we call is the open access fund, which is basically through a purchase order credit card. Now, this is just the open access fund. As I mentioned, a more complex way, a more advanced way of doing it is doing it through read and publish agreements. Or sometimes you could hear them being referred to as transformative agreements, or even transitional agreements. So the goal or the idea of a read and publish agreement is to shift the cost from just paying for subscription, which libraries do, to including an agreement with the publisher that includes both a subscription and an element to publish. And really the goal is to shift costs that are being spent on subscriptions to be on the publishing side. This is something relatively new over the last 6 years, and there are different ways of how this could be done. But the real goal there is that to shift the model of journals from being behind paywalls to being more open access, or to be fully open access. So basically from behind walls to hybrid, which is a combination of both, to fully gold. And the more institutions around the world have these read and publish agreements, at least the idea or the promise behind this is that at one point it will shift, it will transition into the whole thing to open access. So as I mentioned, instead of an institution paying for subscription only and then a publishing agreement or one of those, they have an agreement that combines both together. To give you the why behind this, let's look at your e-resource subscription. This is just a generic line. So in your holdings, you have all this content from different publishers, from different vendors, whether it's journals, books. And as a library, you pay an annual fee to have access to this content. So when you pay, you're happy. You get all this content. It's amazing. You're happy. Your patrons are happy, and etc. And the way also what happens is that some of this content that you subscribe to is published by your researchers or members of your community. So when you have a subscription, you also get access to their content. But what happens when you have an active subscription? You lose the content, you lose everything. Of course, some agreements have perpetual kind of licensing, but that's not always the case. So libraries are dependent on paying a subscription and getting content. And we all know libraries can't afford everything. Libraries have to make a choice of which content to subscribe to. This is the reality of things. So in Qatar, we saw a similar scenario. So when we have an active agreement with the publisher, we get access to the Qatar-based content, we get access to everything. But when we have an inactive, what we're trying to do with the Read and Publish is to ensure that even when there's an inactive subscription, we continue having access to this Qatar-based content because we have made it open access. So in a Read and Publish agreement, you would typically get a number of articles or tokens that allow you to publish the content from, let's say, your institution. In our case, it's Qatar as a national level, but your institution or your country to make it open access, and therefore you're not so dependent on the agreements once they lapse. Now we're doing this, as I also have to say, is that read and publish agreements are typically only given to consortia. So we operate in Qatar as a consortium. We have 10 libraries from the country where we work together on getting the agreements done, and we do cost sharing. And how does this kind of, it's basically led by QNL, but we offer institutional publishing agreements, or we do this on their behalf. We negotiate on behalf of the consortium members, and we support, of course, different business models. And we're always thinking about sustainability in the long run. So the QNL consortium, we're shifting costs. What we're doing in the last 5 years, since 2018, is shifting the costs from subscription agreements or subscription only to read and publish. And right now, we're only signing agreements with publishers if it's a consortium agreement, if it has a publishing element. If it doesn't, then we're not inclined to publish or to sign with them. And again, the goal of the consortium is to support Qatar-based researchers to publish more open access. So back in 2018, our fund was supporting about 50 articles a year. Now it's up to 1,400. So we're trying to make an impact. And the idea, as I mentioned, not only to have a long-term archive of Qatar-based researchers or research, but to have a higher visibility for the country's outputs. Now, very briefly, I want to talk about when it comes to openness and read and publish agreements. It's a very complex kind of exercise that we have to do on a regular basis. It's not fun, it takes a lot of time to get a good agreement, but of course, there's also a lot of work beyond the agreement. So it's very difficult. So when thinking about having read and publish agreements, you need to think about your support network. Do you have the capabilities, the number of staff? And I mentioned in the beginning, great things come from small teams. We're a small team, but we're getting there, right? So, but what we do is we have principles that guide us through the agreements. The things that we look for is that we ensure that there is interlibrary loan, that all the agreements allow for classroom use. They allow for repository deposits. We also make sure that the agreements allow us for text and data mining. We clarify the accessibility, at least for walk-in users, patrons, and that it's basically who can access this. And we make sure that nothing overrides our own copyright law. And most importantly is we remove non-disclosure language. So we make sure that the agreements that we have, that we can share with others. Now, transparency is very important for us. And what we've been doing also is, and this is something that I would like you to keep in mind. If you decide to have an open access fund, or if you're doing one already, make sure you collect all your data. Data about who's submitting, if it's been rejected, if it's been accepted, how much, the currency, etc., publisher, a journal, all of this we collect. And information is gold. It allows us to basically make strategic decisions along the line, whether to continue with the publisher or whether not to continue or to have different decisions. And as I mentioned, the librarians love to collaborate. So as part of our kind of activities, we like to share the data that, basically data about the funding that we have performed in a given year. And we're depositing content on, or the data on OpenAPC. So you actually can go there and see how much we've been spending, with which publisher. And we also are right now looking into publishing our agreements, because we have learned from other agreements that are made public, made open. So this openness is very kind of important for us. We benefited from it, and we're trying to give back. So as I mentioned, that it's a very huge spectrum of being open. You can have a fund, you can have a really published agreement, and then you can even go beyond just having the agreements by publishing your data and publishing your agreements. Again, this slide, when we're doing the open access fund, are we maximizing access, educational benefits, reuse, copyright? So when it comes to the open access fund, one essential thing that we are ensuring or trying to push for is that all the as much as we can, all the articles or all the books that we support are published under a CC BY license. So if you remember the kind of the levels of Creative Commons licenses, the CC BY, or the Creative Commons attribution, that's the most liberal one. This allows for it to be used, you can make derivatives of it, which we think or hope that we can translate, others can translate into Arabic. And basically what we also ensure, and this topic of agreements could take on its own 10 hours to discuss, because when we also look at the agreements, we ensure not only do we review the agreements with the publishers, of course, when we do read a publish, but we also review the licenses that the authors have to sign to publishers. And what we discovered is that even for some publishers, they do like a kind of a sneaky practice where they say, yes, the article will be open access, but you will be assigning the publisher the rights, the full rights, and then they will publish it as open access under a Creative Commons non-commercial, no derivative license or non-commercial license. And the author then loses their commercial rights for the work. So we prevent that. Of course, it's a lot of work, but this is why it's very important to understand why we're doing it. One of the essential things, or one of the important things that we try to do, is make sure that the authors retain copyright. One example, there's a book that we're supporting. We're supporting the publication, or the open access publication of this book, and we're covering the fees. The book is a translation is of an Arabic book. So it's in English, and the Arabic book was published as open access. And so this is the things that basically the authors retained copyright, and they were able to then publish the translation. So it's very important to also understand why you're doing things, and that will influence how you make decisions, and whether you go through the agreements route, which agreements to make, and how you structure those agreements. I want to talk about two things very quickly. Open repositories. So a repository, as I mentioned, is basically a platform where you could hold different content, make it available, and preserve it. If we look at the data from Open Door, and this was done for the month of August, so this month. As you can see that this is basically a visual kind of depiction of different open repositories. So repositories that have open content and registered in the open door registry. And you can see that it's a very kind of diverse picture. Even our region is not very, there aren't many repositories from our region, so it's very clear that we have to do some more work here. It's basically, you see some more in North America, in Southeast Asia, even in South America and Europe. But for the rest of the world, the global South isn't as developed when it comes to having open repositories. Again, we talk about principles, and when doing a repository, you need to think about the FAIR principles. Is the content, the data that you have in your repository findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable? And basically, is the metadata there and it's easy to find? Is it there with a persistent identifier like a DOI or digital object identifier? Is it easy to basically accessible through protocols? Can you then basically change it, you reuse it, etc.? So these are the principles behind a repository that you need to keep in mind. Your goal when, as a library, of having a repository should be your objective, your kind of, whether it's or call it strategic objective or your objective, should be to make your open, should be to make your research or content more open to the world. How you get there, whether it's the fund or repository, will change, of course, but that should be your goal, how to maximize access, how to maximize education reuse, how to maximize reuse itself. And one thing that repositories can do is support more self-archiving, or otherwise known as green open access, where let's say, for example, a researcher publishes an article or a book that is behind a paywall. Some publishers will allow authors to deposit a version of that article, whether it's the manuscript or the author accepted version, into the repository. So we see kind of repositories also supporting kind of the open movement, making content more open. Now, I'll give you a quick example of what we have done at Qatar National Library. So 2 years ago, or less than 2 years, we've launched a new platform called Manara, and it's a national research repository in Qatar. And for those who don't speak Arabic, Manara means lighthouse in Arabic, and we see it. There's always this concept that knowledge is light, and basically the platform we see is kind of attracts people kind of to the knowledge, and that's where the naming is based on. And the goals of Manara is to capture and digitally preserve all the research content from Qatar, but to provide them as an open access to make sure that the access is maximized and the reuse is maximized. So any researcher in Qatar can actually register, and then they could upload their traditional academic works or non-traditional academic works, which we believe are often neglected. So these are like conferences, posters, presentations, but also data sets. We want to see this as a home for more outputs in Arabic. One of my favorite examples of how this was done, there was a faculty member in Hamad bin Khalifa University, our neighbors here, a university next to us. And the researcher basically had all these articles in archive. And they were in English, and they were openly licensed. So basically, he then translated everything into Arabic and put them into Manara. And we want to see more of this. We're also looking into legacy archiving. There's a kind of a changing landscape of universities in Qatar. For example, there was a university that was operated for 15 years, and then it stopped. So we basically took all the content and put it into Manara. So we see as Manara as the go-to location for all research outputs. And everything on there is openly licensed. At the moment, we're still in progress. We have about 6,000 items on there, almost 500,000 views and 170 plus total downloads. So it's really good. We're still in the beginning and we want to see this more. But really the essence of it is that it's used to promote openness. All the content on there is is openly licensed. And we also see it as an infrastructure solution that many institutions in Qatar don't have their own repository. So instead of having to get one or build one, which will come to that in a second, they could use Monaro. And that's just information about the framework. So the build and buy question, I'm not going into this, but of course, there's always this perpetual question. Should we build a repository or should we license or get one that's already out of the box? Each one has pros and cons. If you're building one, you could use open source infrastructure. Excuse me. You can use open source. You can customize it. You can have it in different languages. You can make it look and feel like what you want and imagine the repository to be. Compared to getting something out of the box, which you don't have this customization features. But when getting something out of the box, you don't have to, if you don't have the capacity or the human capital or human resources at your library, it's an easier solution. So there's pros and cons, because if you have to build something, you need a full team supporting it. You have to dedicate staff, and not every library can do this. So depending on your capacities, this question can be answered. Again, going back to my favorite slide, when thinking about a repository, you have to think about how we're going to maximize the benefits, reuse, access, and allow authors to retain copyright. And again, can't say this enough, Creative Commons licenses is the core. It's basically the driver. Of course, there are other kind of licenses and statements, but this is quite like kind of the driver. Lastly, and kind of trying to finalize everything we've been talking about being open. So far, I've been talking about different things, but now let's bring everything together. Whether you have a fund or read and publish agreements or a repository or not, or your heritage, you have your heritage content online, you need to think about how you get people to use it more. And when I'm talking about policies here, I'm going to talk maybe specifically about your library staff. Previously, I've been talking about your patrons, the beneficiaries, or those who benefit from the services. But right now with policies, let's talk about staff. So defining open policies, these are policies that mandate open access publishing or dissemination of, let's say, data, scholarly activity through a repository or through any other services. But this is just one definition. So we have to think now that you have all these different things, or you have some of it. What can you do at your library? How can you make sure people use your services more? And also your staff. So some policies and other instruments to be more open at your library. You can clarify your library's position on public domain content. So you can have a statement in your website saying how you approach public domain. You can have an open access fund and negotiate contracts with publishers, such as read and publish agreements. You can have, as I mentioned, kind of the contemporary collections, where you ensure that anything that you receive as a library, something new, is openly licensed to you. And really nice, something that's good, it's really nice, is that you can look into how you can make your staff publications or your library outputs, like such as annual report or any other kind of content that your library produces, whether it's I mean, some libraries have publishing programs, so you can actually think about your library outputs to be more open, to be added to the repository, or even just published openly. So some examples from QNL. This is a screenshot of our copyright policy, where we talk about how we make it clear that we want to make appropriate uses of works that have no longer or are no longer copyright protected. And it is a policy of the library to make appropriate use of the works that have entered the public domain. So basically, it's our policy to communicate to all our users that this content is public domain and therefore they're free to use. So we take that approach. What's also nice is on our website, qnl.qa, all the text on the website is licensed under Creative Commons attribution license, which means that anybody can take the text on our website, reuse it, make derivatives of it, as long, of course, as they give attribution to CUNA. And the last thing as I want to mention is that we also have, as library staff, a section on Manara, our Qatar Research Repository, dedicated to the Qatar National Library, where we invite staff who have presented in different conferences, who have posters in different conferences, to submit and upload their content on the repository. And we even were talking with our HR to have it as part of the procedure, is that whenever somebody goes on a trip, they need to put their content on Manara. So we started this recently, so it takes some time for us to understand how it works and how it doesn't work, but that's a good step to becoming more open. A note here also is that whenever we host a conference, whether it's online or in the library, and we get presentations, we ask the speakers to license these items to us under a Creative Commons license, and we put this on the repository. So the KNL section on Manara has openly licensed presentations from KNL hosted events. Now, I'll try to summarize or stop here, but what I want to say is that, again, with everything that I talked about today, you need to think about, why do you want to be open? Why should libraries be open? Why should your library be open? What works for you? And you need to think about which values and principles apply to you. But you need to come up also with these values, and these should be your driver behind making decisions. Is making the work more accessible important for you? If yes, that's your value for you, a principle that you should follow. Is making education more useful? Yes, then follow that. Or is supporting researchers your principle or value, and do that? Or is copyright kind of your driver? You need to think about what is relevant to you and come up with these principles, because principles are stronger than a list or a checklist. They survive time, and this is what you need to focus on and come up with. Our kind of, again, checklist: are you maximizing access? Are you maximizing education benefits? Are you maximizing reuse? Are you following copyright and allowing authors to retain copyright? Now, one thing that you can do that's very easy without anything is organize an open access week event. So the next one is in October, 21 to 27th October this year. The theme was community over commercialization. You can do an event, a small event. You can talk to your staff. You can make a bigger event, physical, online. But the very least they can do to be more open as a library right now is to have something in Open Access Week. So maybe that's your target for the next 2 months. And this image, yes. So I've used Midjourney, and so Midjourney is an AI tool to come up with kind of different images. This was a while back. But basically, what would a library look if it has all of its content open? And this is the image that came back to me. So maybe this should be our target, like to have everything in our library open, whether it's the content, the outputs from the library, from the staff, to doing a fund, doing a repository, to doing contemporary collections or heritage material. But this is what maybe an ideal scenario would look like. With that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. And I'm happy right now. This is my email address. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. And yes, I think this is time now for some discussions. So thanks so much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Dr. El-Walid. So I am having a look at the chats. There are some questions, but we also would like to ask you all. We've always heard back from our community that you want more interaction. So we'd love to hear from you guys now. If you have any questions, please, you have two options. Either you can add them onto the chat, or you can raise your hand and we'll unmute your mic so that you can ask it to Dr. El-Walid directly. I'm just having a quick look now. A lot of people are saying thank you. Some people unfortunately had to go, but I did see one question. Yeah, right here. Much of the discussion has been about journals. Do you have book-specific policies? Can books or book chapters access your open access fund?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, because that's something that we are let's say, mindful of. We've been doing open access funding for journals for a longer time. One is because it's maybe more popular, it's more prominent, or kind of more frequent, I would say, that researchers publish journal articles. But it's also cheaper, right? It's also, I mean, a journal article can cost, yes, can be expensive, but it's definitely less expensive than a book. But that said, we want to support more open access books, especially when it comes to certain fields such as the social sciences or humanities, where books are maybe more important. So we do receive books requests, either full books or book chapters through the Open Access Fund, and we have supported these in the last 5 years, maybe one or two a year, compared to 1,400 articles. But what we're doing right now is we're looking into having more open access book agreements. So similar to the structure where we do with the journals, we're looking into working with publishers to deposit an amount with them, and that could then be used to kind of streamline the whole publishing of books. And we announced a couple of weeks ago our first book agreement with Springer Nature. So this is a pilot that we're doing, and we hope that, well, I can't say here, but we're going to announce another one very soon in the next 2 weeks. So we're doing more of that, and we're looking at which books or which publishers are more kind of in demand by the community here, and we're looking into doing that. Now, with the policies, it may be different because we may look into kind of whether we haven't done it yet, but whether we can bring in our collection development policy of the library connect it with the book funding to see which books would make more sense to fund over the others, but we haven't gone there yet. We're still following the same procedure. If you're a Qatar-based researcher, you can qualify.
Great. I am just having a quick read through. A lot of people are sharing resources and like tips on the chat as well, which is so helpful and great. It's exactly what we are looking for, collaboration amongst the community. If anyone has any other questions, please do feel free to add it on the chat or raise your hand. We would honestly prefer if you raise your hand because we'd love to hear from you guys in person. In the meantime, I know quite a few people have asked for your contact details, and I think
Yeah,
maybe it would be good if we could go back on the slide just where it said, your details, because then people can reach out to you if needed. A lot of praise for you. So thank you so much, Dr. Abarid. It's been a great session. I can see everyone's very, very, they're finding it all very helpful.
that's
I'm
great. I
just
mean,
gonna
like
give
as I
people
mentioned,
sometimes.
we're happy to talk with anybody and collaborate. As I mentioned, librarians are very collaborative. Whenever we had a question and we didn't know how to proceed, we reached out to libraries around the world and we got into a call and we talked with them. So if you're interested, and if any of the kind of the attendees interested in having a call with us, just email me and we can set up something and we can discuss whatever you want, or give more examples and more details.
Incredible. Uh, yeah. Oh, here's a question. So Abdelaziz Galel is asking, he's saying, I'm curious to know if you have assessed the impact of adopting this
No.
open access, open science policy at QNL. Has there been an increase in the publication by Qatari researchers?
Okay. So the second question is easier to answer. It's yes. There has been an increase in publications in general, I would say, but I would say kind of just an organic increase, independent of being open or not. But what we did see is a significant increase in the number of open access articles or open access publications. One of the drivers is that because we have a fund or because we have a service, people have been publishing more open access. But with the impact, that's a very valid and important question that we're also asking ourselves. We're working on a study or an analysis right now to look at what we have done the last 5 years and to see what is the impact. What is the citation advantage? Because when you talk with publishers or when you talk with, there are different reports showing that an open access publication has more views and downloads and therefore citations um, 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 of the articles we publish. But that's something we are aware that we need to look at and come up with a conclusive kind of report. So we have different reports from different publishers that we work with. I believe we have good relationships with the publishers that we work with, and they're always sharing with us the impact of the work, but we need something more kind of independent, and that's what we're doing right now.
Wonderful. We have another question about Manara. Rani
Yes.
Anand is asking if you know which interface QNL used to implement Manara.
Yes, I know. So basically, we are using Figshare. So Manara is powered by Figshare by Digital Sciences, and that's the platform that Manara is based on.
Right. Hopefully it can be implemented in other libraries if people are interested in the same concept.
And yes, I mean,
I'm
if
just
for
going to
those who are
give
attending forum, I'm saying, like trying to kind of promote forum conference as well. So
plug
for
it.
those attending
You gotta
forum
plug it.
on, like, yeah. So on day 4, which is the 24th of October, we're going to have a workshop run by Qatar National Library and talking about our experiences about setting up the repository, Manara, from making decisions in the early stages of which platform to go to, how to organize the content, which content to go to, outreach, to policies, to even like FAQs. So if you're in the conference, please try to attend this on the 24th.
Yes, great plug. I'm gonna give maybe just a few more seconds because I know sometimes people start typing their questions and we just assume there are no questions. There you go, like that, just like that. Hamad Akram Imtiaz is asking, does QNL accept donation of books for digitalization from other libraries or individuals?
Yes, I would say yes, but that's with a completely different department. There's a whole policy or procedure in which content that we accept. But we do have donations, and but digitization also, of course, dependent on more than just having the physical copy. Of course, copyright. We make sure that whatever we digitize either has entered the public domain or is being preserved for kind of preservation purposes if the copy is so bad. But that's a completely different department, so I can't comment on that. But if you reach out to me, I can connect you with the right team or even the webpage that you can submit your donation.
Okay, cool. So we are good on time, which is great news. We've concluded with just under an hour and a half, which I think is solid for us. If you guys have any other questions or you wanted to raise anything with Dr. Al-Walid privately, his email is on the screen. You can just jot that down now. Otherwise, if you could just hold on for 2 more minutes, we're just going to wrap up the event with some information from Forum. I don't know, Dr.
May I
Al-Walid,
just
is
say
there
one
anything you
comment?
want to add? Yes,
Yeah, I just want to comment. I'm
please.
seeing comments about the language of this, so I think maybe one thing that we can do in the future is do with this in Arabic, and I'm more than happy
Yeah.
to repeat this in Arabic.
So yes, yeah, I did see that as well, which was something I'm going to mention. So for our previous workshop, it was hosted in Arabic, and the recording is currently on our website, and we are working to subtitle it in English. For this workshop, we're going to be reversing it, where obviously the workshop was hosted in English, but we will be working on Arabic subtitling, and we will include that as an attempt to make it more accessible. Like I said, we're kind of trial and erroring this workshop format, and we're working on figuring out just exactly how to figure out the like bilingual element of everything. So once we do that, we'll definitely let everyone know. But for the meantime, subtitling is where we're going to be kind of stopping just until we can figure out a smoother way. But yeah, don't worry. We are aware, we are a platform that is dedicated to the Arab world. I'm Arab, Dr. Al-Walid is Arab, and we are extremely dedicated to making sure it's as bilingual and accessible as possible. We're just working
I
out the
mean, that said,
kinks,
if I may say, we as Arabs, we can't agree on a definition of what or we can't. That's so maybe it's easier to say open access, but I agree about this. So I will
Yeah,
be more than happy to repeat this in Arabic. But there are like 10 different ways of how you can refer to open access. So, but
yeah.
we
No,
will. That's just
exactly.
one limited. But of course, we doing this in more accessible language. Yeah, نشر وصول الحر. But for example, our library, we say الإتاحة الحرة. الإتاحة الحرة by our yes, that's the. I mean, Lean is mentioning that الإتاحة الحرة is. If you talk with Dr. Abed, our translator, he said no, الوصول الحر is not الإتاحة الحرة. So different, yeah. But just aside, sorry.
No,
Not sure.
absolutely. I mean, like you mentioned earlier in your presentation, that was something that we were working on for the longest time at Forum. We were collaborating with our advisory board, trying to figure out an Arabic glossary of open terms and terminology because it's something so like fresh for the region. So
And on
yes,
that,
we're
I
still
have to say that we didn't agree with, like, for us, QNR, we didn't agree with the final translations, but at least it's an open access, so we're planning to take it, make changes, and publish it again. So again,
there you go. I mean, we do our best, is all we can really come down to, as a region and as like people in an organization. Okay, as people are also asking for the slides for today's presentation. If it's okay with Dr. Al-Walid, we will be uploading the slides onto our Zenodo platform, and we can share that with everyone once the recording is uploaded as well. We'll let you all know when both things have been uploaded. So just to wrap up, we do have just a few more events being hosted for the rest of 2024 in our community development activities. We've got a symposium coming up in September. It's going to be all about transformative agreements, pros and cons. Are we for them? Are we against them? It should be a very interesting conversation and hopefully won't get too heated. In October, we also have the annual forum, which we'll talk more about in just a second, but that will be the main event, the conference that will be hosted in Doha, but it's a hybrid event, so you can also join us online if you can't make it in person. And we have one more how to be open workshop that's going to be dedicated to institutions. And then the final event to wrap it all up for the year will be a workshop on how and why to launch an open access journal. Next slide, please. We're just going to talk a little bit about the annual forum. So as we mentioned earlier, it's our annual conference that we host every year in a different country around the Arab world. This year, we have the honor of partnering with Qatar National Library, and we will be hosting it there from the 21st to the 23rd. So sorry, I need to update those dates. But yeah, we've added an extra day because we included workshops this year. So the final day will be workshops. Our theme for the year is transforming knowledge into action. Last year, we were focusing a lot more on policy. This year, we really want to drill down on the practical ways that we can start implementing all of the ideas that we're always talking about. And we've got 4 thematic areas or streams that we're going to be looking at specifically within policy and funding, open access publishing, capacity building, community engagement, and open infrastructures. So if you're interested in registering, early bird discounts for in-person registration will close on the 1st of September. So do take advantage of that as early as you can. Otherwise, we do also have online, as I've mentioned, and it's at a permanently kind of like discounted rate. And so I'm just going to leave that there for just a second. But otherwise, scan the QR code if you want to register. Otherwise, you can also just go directly onto the forumforopenresearch.com website and you can register on there as well. And you can kind of get an idea or a sense of everything that will be included in your registration. Okay, next slide. Another thing to mention is that, as always, Forum has, earlier this year, we launched our Slack community, and it's a great opportunity and a great way for you to introduce yourself to the community and our network, but also take advantage of all of the people who are engaging with us on a daily basis or on a monthly or on a yearly or whatever, however often you join us. We don't gatekeep our network. We want everyone to communicate with everyone. We want as much collaboration as physically possible. So on our Slack channel, you can also directly message anyone who is a member or a partner, or a member, a partner, or just an advocate of Forum. If you're interested in joining our Slack channel, just email us at contact@forumforopen.org, and we'll go ahead and add you onto the community. Next slide, please. Last thing is, this workshop is certified. It's a shame for some of the people who had to run off, but we do have certifications that will get automated and sent to you only on the condition that you fill out the worksheet. It's not really a worksheet, it's more of just kind of a survey to get a feel of what you thought of the event, things that we can do to improve, things that you enjoyed, and other ideas or topics that you want us to discuss for 2025's program. Once you scan the QR code and submit all of this information, you'll get a link that will then send you to where you can get your certification. You can take a moment to scan this QR code. We're going to leave it up for about a minute. Otherwise, you will be receiving an email shortly that also has the link on there. So you can also just do it, in your own time. However, we do close certification after 3 months post event. So leave it if you need to for a few minutes, maybe a few hours, but don't leave it for too long, because I know I would forget, and then I would remember 3 months later and be like, oh, and then it would be too late. And yeah, so thank you so much, Dr. Al-Walid, again, for your time today. Thank you for the really insightful presentation. And thank you to everyone who shared your comments and your opinions, or anyone who just joined in to learn. And we hope to see you again in our next events. And please do register for the annual forum if you do want to get access to more information and more resources and more support, and just information like you did today. Okay, thank you everyone. Have a good day.